as Christians, we should want to look and live as much like Christ as we possibly can. Let's take a look today at a man who did just that in this episode of the Contend Podcast. Everyone, welcome to this episode of the Contend Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Geckler. I'm excited for this episode as well as what is going on for Contend. We have some exciting things coming up. I'll tell you a little bit more about those in the Contend wrap-up portion of the video and of the podcast, so we can jump right into our contender through history for today. We're talking about John the Baptist. He's one of my favorite characters in the Bible, I think I could say, probably behind David. But we could do a whole series of contender through history just on John the Baptist. Who knows, maybe we will do that. Maybe we'll do a couple different lessons. But let's jump right into this lesson today. If you are following along as a Bible study, grab your Bible and turn to John chapter 1. We're going to look at just a couple verses here, and then we're going to look at Mark chapter number 6. But John chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, it says, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light." Today our main thought, usually I wait till the end to give you the main thought, but our main thought for the contender through history from the life of John the Baptist is to contend like Christ. To contend like Christ. Notice here that in the book of John, when God is telling us who John is, he thinks it's very important. He even felt it was necessary. The Lord himself felt it was necessary to make the delineation between John the Baptist and Christ. Notice it says he was not that light, but he was sent to bear witness of that light. It's very interesting to me when I think of when God looks at my life. Does he think it's important to let people know, no, that's Sam Geckler, that's not the Christ? And I don't misunderstand me. I don't want to sound at all to be blasphemous or sacrilegious or disrespectful or anything of that nature. But I do want to look like Christ, right? I do want people to see Christ in me when they look at me. We see in the book of Acts where I believe it's Peter and John. It says that they took knowledge of them. They were unlearned men, but they could tell that they had been with Christ. And I think that's a very interesting thing. That's something that we as Christians, as contenders for the faith in 2020, in this time where things are just totally crazy. I don't even know where to begin with many of those things when we think of COVID-19, when we think of the unrest in the major cities of America, when we think of economic problems that many are facing because of those first two things. When we think of all of that, there's just so many things that really what people need to see is Christ. They don't need to see us. They don't need to see our personal feelings on each one of those things, but they do need to see Christ in us. So we see that there in that even God felt it was necessary to make that point that John the Baptist was not Christ, but he was sent to bear witness of him. If you, once again, if you have your Bible, we're going to look at Mark chapter 6, verses 16 and 20. It says, this is where Christ is asking the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they say, some say Elias, some say John the Baptist, some say one of the prophets, and they say, who do you think I am? And he says, "Thou art the Christ." We know the story. And we look at verse number 14. We'll start 14, 16, and then verse 20. Verse number 14, it says, "And King Herod heard of him," this being Christ, "for his name was spread abroad. And he said," this is Herod saying, "that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him." Skip down to 16 if you're following along. "But when Herod heard thereof, he said, It is John, whom I beheaded. He is risen from the dead." Verse number 20 takes us back in the story a little bit. It says, "For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and an holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly." Verse number 20 speaks, obviously, before John was dead. And then 14 and 16 early in the chapter is after he is. But in verse number 20, we see that Herod knew John as a holy man. When John told him things, he listened to him. It says he heard him gladly. He knew he was just. He knew he was holy, and he heard what he had to say. But notice that when he heard about Jesus, in verse number 14, it says when he heard of him, being Christ, he said, what did he say? That John the Baptist was risen from the dead. So we see that when Herod heard about Jesus, he even associated with it and said, that must be John the Baptist, even though he's risen, even though I've killed him, even though we know that story that took place where where the girl had come and danced, and it pleased him and those that were with him, and he said, I'll give you whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. And her mom said, give me the head of John the Baptist. And so he had to do that to honor his word. But he thought, when he heard of Christ, he thought it was John the Baptist. I think that's a very interesting thing. Personally, I want people to see Christ in me. And I think we need to be Christians who want to point people to Christ and thus show them Christ in ourselves. We shouldn't be so concerned with what do I want. We need to be concerned with what Christ wants. We shouldn't want people to see us. We should want them to see Christ. When people look at me, I want them to say that I'm someone who looks, acts, walks, talks, behaves, prays, serves like Jesus. I don't want them to say, oh, that's someone who is serving like Sam Geckler, although I do want my name to be associated with someone who is serving like Jesus. But I want them to look at me and say, that's someone who is doing what Christ would be doing. That's someone who is doing what the Lord would be doing. If he was in this situation right now, he's behaving like Jesus. And I believe we can learn that from the life of John. If you look at the life of John, when he's baptizing Jesus even, he's saying, Lord, you should be baptizing me. But we know the picture there. And we see that he was someone who wanted to give God and give the Lord the credit and the glory and the praise for everything that happened in his life. And we need to be people who do that as well. When people look at us, they should see Jesus. When they look at us, they should be like, whoa, that person looks so much like Christ. It's like I'm talking to the Lord, or I'm watching the Lord as he acts. We need to be that person. We need to be someone who contends like Jesus. By contending, we can even use the example of John. We need to contend like the Lord, contend like Christ would in this situation. Stay tuned for the Contend wrap-up for just a moment so that you can hear about some exciting things coming up for Contend and some new info about the Contend podcast. So for the Contend podcast today, I just want to share a couple new things, a couple interesting things, and maybe allude to some things coming up as well. But the Contend podcast has moved to a different platform for the host. And so because of that, we're able to have the podcast on some new players, some new podcast players such as Spotify. Was already on Apple Podcasts, but it's still there. It's on Google Podcasts as well, and some other ones. There's a complete list of the podcasts that it's available on samgeckler.com. If you go there, hit Contend Podcast there in the menu or in the drop-down menu, and it'll show you the list of places where you can find the Contend podcast. I'm very excited about this. It's kind of opened up some new opportunities as well. And also, while you're there, check out, if you're on samgeckler.com, sign up for the mailing list there, because all the podcasts are also going to be shared as blog posts with links to the videos as well as links to the podcasts as well on podcast players, the audio only format. So I'm hoping that you'll enjoy it. I'm hoping that you'll be stay connected with samgeckler.com and all the different things there, because there's some exciting things coming up. I'm very excited for a new opportunity that we have coming through Contend, and stay tuned for the next couple weeks because we're going to be talking about them real soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Contend podcast. As always, go ahead and like it, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on the notification bell so that you can get notified every time we upload a video. And if you're listening to just the audio only version, subscribe on your favorite podcast player and leave us a review so that we can get bumped up in the ratings there. Share this podcast with your friends, and always remember, don't be a pretender, be a contender.